Morning, ladies and gentlemen. I don't know what your experience with your clients is around cybersecurity, where you find they are in terms of a journey from thinking cybersecurity is something they ought to worry about, or whether they think compliance is just the minor thing that's on their mind, or whether you have clients who think that cybersecurity is a critical part of their corporate competitive position. Certainly from all the organizations that we deal with around the world and around the UK, we find that organizations stretch anywhere between cybersecurity really is a credible pain in the neck, something which we want to avoid because as a board we don't understand it, it's way too difficult for us, all the way through to organizations who think that being properly compliant and deeply resilient through the organization is a sensible way to approach life. I don't know, on a show of hands basis, how many of you have clients who are mostly in the it's a grudge purchase end of the spectrum? Okay, and how many of you have clients who are up at this is the most important part of what we do, cyber resilience, cyber security, really makes us competitive? Kind of in the middle. Okay. Well, that's pretty well how it is around the world. Most people think it's a grudge purchase. Still, a growing number of organizations are thinking they need to do something about it. And there's a much smaller number of organizations who know that it's important. And it's interesting to think about those statistics in the context of the General Data Protection Regulation, or what's now the UK's Data Protection Act 2018. By May the 25th, after a 2-year transition period, the data suggests that somewhere around about 27% of Britain's companies claim to be compliant with GDPR. I don't know about your experience of people's claims of compliance, but we reckon it's probably therefore about half of that. Lots of people go, yeah, we're definitely compliant because, hey, we've got a policy. We've definitely got a policy on our websites that must make us completely compliant, and we've heard about what a subject access request is, so we're probably super compliant. There's a third of the UK's organizations who haven't actually started on GDPR compliance yet. I don't know why. Maybe they haven't heard of it. Maybe nobody wrote to them and said, we're updating our preferences. Do you still want to be on our mailing list? Maybe they don't read the newspaper. Maybe they just think that it doesn't matter or isn't going to apply to them, or they don't need to worry about it. But that's normal distribution stuff. If you think about any marketplace, there's a distribution curve where you've got a minority of people who are way ahead of the pack, and then there's another minority who don't do anything until everybody else has addressed the issue. So from a partner point of view, I guess as you look amongst all of your clients, you're going to see a similar distribution curve. You're not going to see all of your clients up in the highly competitive area and all of your clients down in the it doesn't apply to us area. You're going to see a standard distribution curve of organizations sitting across that. So from a partner perspective, when you're thinking about cybersecurity, it can get useful to think about how you help organizations along the journey between, nah, not for us, and gosh, why isn't the entire world already compliant? Because if you can begin to think about where your clients are on that journey, you can begin to focus particular services or offers or options on those specific organizations in a way that enables them to deal with it, rather than trying to get everybody to buy the same things from you all of the time. And it's that experience of a world that's changing, of organizations moving through the range of options that led us to develop what we call a cyber resilience model. And cyber resilience comes from the idea that cybersecurity on its own is not enough. So the concept of resilience is defined as the ability to rapidly adapt, protect assets, and respond to risks. So built into the idea of resilience is the idea that you have to be able to float with the punches. You have to be able to absorb punishment. You have to be able to cope with stuff that happens. You can't, if you're a resilient organization, pretend that one level of defense is going to be enough, because it won't be. If an attacker gets beyond your first level of defense, you're in trouble. And much cybersecurity traditionally has been built around the idea of a standard perimeter defense. Once people get beyond it, they can get at whatever they like. And over the last 5 or 10 years, increasingly, organizations have begun to think about defense in depth, thinking about defending data at the data level, at the application level, at the network level, thinking about defending themselves not just around the perimeter, but also at that incredibly vulnerable endpoint called a human being. Something like over 3/4 of all successful attacks take advantage of the vulnerability that is your staff. And sensible organizations begin thinking about how do we manage that range of ways in which we can be attacked. And that's what we call resilient thinking. And so business resilience, and business resilience as an idea has been emerging for about the last 10 years. It's becoming where business continuity management is moving to, is the idea that a business should be able to protect its business assets by responding to business disruptions and maintaining continuous business operations. In today's digital world, business disruptions include digital disruptions, don't they? Business continuity is originally built around the idea of what do we do if there's a major electrical outage or a bomb drops on the building or there's a huge fire. That's what business continuity plans traditionally have been about. But actually, the reality today is that many operations are disrupted because of something which has gone wrong in perhaps a software development process, a rollout of software which has not been properly tested and can't handle what you're asking it to do, or it's rolled out into environments, into production environment where it simply doesn't work, or where there is a distributed denial of service attack, or something which disrupts the service. But most business continuity planning still exists in the physical facilities environment. It doesn't recognize that business continuity planning ought to involve the disruption of digital processes as well as of the business generally. So business resilience contains today business continuity and disaster recovery. It implies the idea of being able to mitigate a loss or a disruption, and the extension of business resilience into the field of cybersecurity then produces a definition which talks of a resilient organization as one that's able to repel cyber attacks while protecting its critical business assets, adapting and responding to business disruptions, and maintaining continuous business operations. Nice, simple, straightforward definition that captures all of the key aspects of resilience. In other words, recognizing that you're going to get breached. I think that's an important part of conversations you should be having with clients. You're going to be breached. It's not possible to put in place a level of defense that means an organization will not be breached. So racing certainty, sooner or later you're going to have a breach. Remember the definition of breach nowadays, because it's primarily now driven by GDPR, the definition of breach is very, very broad. It's any compromise of the integrity, availability, or confidentiality where personal data is concerned of personal data, and by extension, a breach is any compromise of the CI and or A of data. Compromises include, I deleted the file by mistake. It includes, well, you know, if you think about the couple of attacks that took place on the venerable NHS a little while ago, you may remember that there are elements of the NHS which still have Microsoft operating systems which are no longer in support, and which the NHS decided it didn't even want to take the extended half-price support package that Microsoft offered because it was much less expensive not to have it and just to be disrupted. I don't know how they did the math, but that's apparently what they came up with. And the rolling out of WannaCry and a couple of other happy attacks meant that there were a number of hospitals which over a weekend or a number of days were unable to carry out operations that had been planned. And the managers of those hospitals said proudly, we didn't have an information security breach that compromised the data of our patients. That's just rubbish. Clearly compromise the data of patients because you're unable to carry out an operation. If you've got somebody who's lined up to come in on a Friday to have their kidneys removed or something equally unpleasant, and now they can't come and they have a critical health issue as a result because you didn't bother upgrading your system, that's a major data breach. So organizations thinking about cyber resilience need to be thinking about how do we avoid compromises of C, I, and A of all data, irrespective of where those attacks come from. And so if you're thinking about cyber resilience, and I'll link this through to what we see as a model which involves organizations moving from not doing very much to becoming deeply cyber resilient shortly. Effective cyber resilience depends on integrated preparation for being attacked, recognizing that you are going to be attacked and that some of those attacks will be successful and that you need to have a mechanism for identifying them and responding to them. It's a kind of interesting fact that the average period of detection between the point at which a breach occurs and the point at which it's discovered is about 197 days. Average, 197 days, and typically the discovery is by a third party, not by the organization that's been breached. So, going back to GDPR, as you may or may not know, the UK government decided not to legislate for cybersecurity, not put cybersecurity regulations in place because they reckoned that the GDPR would do the job for them, and of course they could always blame it on the European Union, but the interesting thing that the GDPR says is that if you are breached, you've got 72 hours from discovering it to report it. 72 consecutive hours, not business hours, 72 consecutive hours. So Friday afternoon discovery, you're reporting it on Monday afternoon. So you've also got to prove, if you're going to avoid a significant fine, that you weren't negligent. The whole way the ICO approaches fines is saying, well, your maximum is 4%, you've had a breach of the one or more of the 6 data protection principles, so we're looking at a maximum level of fine of 4%. What have you done to reduce your exposure? What have you done to protect the data of the people who've been affected? And if you say, well, we've done a whole lot, but we didn't put in place anything that would enable us to discover we've been breached. That's why it's taken us 197 days on average to discover we've been breached. I think you've got a bit of a struggle to convince the ICO that you're not negligent. Because the stats are out there. These are not private hidden statistics. This data is publicly available. It's a known fact that on average it takes organizations a hell of a long time to notice they've been breached. And if you're not taking steps to close that down, to identify anomalous behavior inside the network, to work out what might have happened, to have trained people, then you've got a real challenge to say, we've not been negligent. I don't know how many of you have had to report a data breach to the ICO yet. Has anybody had to report one yet? Okay, so I don't know about you, but I think the most terrifying question on that form is, what could you have done to avoid this breach happening? Because that's the question you don't want to be answering, saying, I've got a whole long list of things I could have done, I just didn't get around to it because we had other things to do. Because that's when you're right up against the argument of, have you been negligent or not? So thinking about cyber resilience has not just a business benefit in terms of ensuring that you're able to continue providing services to clients, but also it enables you to demonstrate the extent to which, if you're breached, you've gone to ensure that you can identify and respond to data breaches. So coordinate and integrated preparations. That means you've got to integrate what you're doing in both the physical and the digital domains. You've got to think about business continuity, facilities management, all that area of stuff, and tie it into your digital activity. You've got to make sure that the way in which you escalate from any incident into evoking a full business continuity plan is consistent, irrespective of whether the incident is a physical intruder, who today could be attempting to get at your network, or it's a digital disruption. All should be able to lead to determining on a pre-tested basis which aspects of a business continuity plan you should evoke. You need a strategy. Putting in place a genuine cyber resilient framework is not the work of a couple of weeks. If you have a client who understands the journey they need to go on, you're looking at working with them over a 2 to 3 year period as they get better at integrating what they're doing and making themselves more cyber resilient. So from a partner point of view, cyber resilience is something which can become a key part of a long-term relationship with your customers, helping them move through the journey towards a greater level of resilience. You have to have an integrated management system. You can't deal with cyber resilience in silos. You can't have compliance separated from cybersecurity, separated from business continuity. You've got to join it together. You've got to have somebody who has oversight inside the organization of cyber resilience. You've got to have somebody on the board who understands what that's about, who in senior management, and who can own it, and who can drive it, and who can talk about it, who can keep on making the link between things that are in the press and what as an organization you're doing to make sure that as an organization you're continuing to respond and improve. Effective cyber resilience depends really substantially on all of your staff. I've said a number of times the human is the biggest vulnerability that most organizations have today. We spend a lot of money on technical security, on firewalls, on VPNs, on how we isolate users inside a network, but actually it's the users that are the problem. And users are a problem because they go into a coffee shop, they come and sit out here. I don't know how many of you logged on to the etcvenues.com access point. Yeah, does anybody access? Yeah. How many of you checked to make sure it wasn't one of our guys sitting in the back there just running an access point? Got a VPN, very good. So it's a normal thing in most coffee shops around the land, are people sitting there running access points, because it's one of the simplest attacks that you can make. Somebody logs on, they don't pay attention. Now they can see all of the traffic that's going through your email system. You've got to train staff to do that. You've got to train staff to recognize what's happening. Phishing emails get better and better and better. The reality is that the cyber criminals are spending way more on attack technology than we're spending today on defense technology. And why wouldn't you? If you're running a really effective, properly organized criminal enterprise, you want to automate as much as you can. You've got a continual improvement program in place. You're looking at how you can do this job better all the time. Yeah, you can see that if you send out 1 zillion really badly formed emails, you only get about 3 responses. But if you spend a bit of time creating really good ones with really well-spoofed email addresses, with really, really good graphics that look exactly like the original, you get a far better response. So your continual improvement program drives you to do a better and better job. But your staff have to be aware of that. They have to be aware of the fact that this incoming email, which looks exactly as though it's come from your customer with a, here is the purchase order that you wanted aimed at one of the people in your sales team, just might not be. Because if they weren't expecting a purchase order, they shouldn't get excited about one arriving out of the blue, because it might not be. It might be going to download a little itsy bit of code which is going to reach out, command and control code, which is going to reach out onto the internet and bring in a whole bunch of bad stuff that will enable the attacker to have fun with your network. And you won't know about it because the member of staff won't tell you that this purchase order which they opened didn't turn out to be a purchase order after all. They'll just go, I might have screwed up. Don't tell anybody. And weeks or months later, you'll go, we appear to have been breached. So staff training, putting in place a level of awareness that means staff are almost paranoid about what they click on is not a bad thing to do. There are some technology components you can build in. If you use Office 365, Advanced Threat Protection brings a number of capabilities that improves the way that you can manage those kinds of things. But the heart of it is staff awareness and training staff around not just the threats of yesterday, but the threats of today, so they are aware of them, and they're able to say, bugger, I just did something I shouldn't have done, and report it is critical. And that I shouldn't have done this, but I'm going to report it, is a really important part of training staff. The one thing you don't want to do is go and fire them the moment they do something wrong, because then they won't tell you. And it's much more important to find out so that you can fix it than it is to fire the person who makes an error. People are going to make errors. Like I keep saying, they're spending more money, the attackers, on attacking us than we're spending on defending. So that means we're going to be breached. That means we have to encourage people to report breaches so that we can do something about it. And that brings you into the area of scenario testing, working out all the scenarios in which you might be breached so that you can plan your response. The 72 hours you've got from, bugger, we've just had, BA have stolen 380,000 sets of customer data. No, 500 and something thousand, it turns out. You've got just 72 hours to work that stuff out and start reporting to the data protection office, to the ICO. You need to have done some work around that. The CREST, and most of you will know CREST because we're a CREST-accredited Cyber Essentials certification body. They also have done quite a lot of work over the years on what cyber incident response should look like, on a formalized approach to cyber incident response. And part of what you could be talking to your clients about is how you help them with cyber incident response, how we can help you help them with incident response. But the starting point is preparation. The starting point is for your clients to work out which are the elements of data in the systems which are critical to their operation. You don't want to focus necessarily on everything across the organization, just what's critical. Then you do a threat analysis. What are the actual threats that might exploit which specific vulnerabilities? How likely is it will happen? What's the impact if it's going to occur? I advise against just doing a blanket, those are threats, let's block them all out, because different organizations have got different appetites for risk, different budgets they can spend. Doing a threat analysis, taking the time out to do that job properly is a smart thing to do. It's one of the things that you can deploy our consultants to do. We can do a risk assessment. We can help an organization identify what their critical assets are, what the real threats are, what the impacts may be, and what the implications on people, process, and technology might be if those attacks come to pass. So we can help them put in place, help them put in place an appropriate control framework. Because the first step in dealing with potential threats is to try and reduce the likelihood or impact. And we can help you do that. Cyber Essentials is one of the parts of that control framework. Cyber Essentials is the set of controls which, as you know, is designed to eliminate or to reduce the likelihood of something like 80% of the automated internet-borne attacks from being effective. ISO 27001 is a much more advanced, what we think of as perhaps the baseline for cybersecurity, but it's a more comprehensive set of controls which looks also at people and process, not just at the technology aspects of what you're doing. And then make sure that having got a set of controls in place, you've worked out, tying that all together, how your incident response process is going to work. Do you have, for instance, people reporting what they think might be a cybersecurity incident through the same processes they report my desktop stopped working or my laptop's packed up? Do you have a single integrated reporting process, or do you say to staff, please report security incidents to somebody else and help desk incidents to help desk? Worth thinking about. If you give people two things to do, they'll get confused and they'll do them the wrong way around. So the smart thing to do is to have everything go to help desk. I don't know what's happened, send it to help desk and do triage on help desk. And that means that if part of the service you're giving your clients is help desk, you need to think about how you do triage. Who's going to identify this is a simple software problem or hardware problem, we know how to fix that. This is a security issue, it needs to go to the security team. But that should be, if you're going to give an integrated service to clients, part of what you're thinking about doing. How do we enable help desk to deal with the broad range of disruptions, from technical disruptions through to determined cyber attack type disruptions? So that's the first stage, says CREST, is preparation. The second is to be able to respond. That means you've got to identify cyber incidents. I'm sure that many of you, in terms of the services you give clients, will already have some form of monitoring services available. You'll be monitoring different types of anomalies and different activities on the network. I don't know how many of you, where that's part of your service, are also monitoring out-of-hours activity. You're monitoring the unusual activity that takes place at 1 o'clock in the morning from a server that's not usually in action, or a part of the network that's not in action. Whether you're monitoring for the kinds of things that would indicate a successful advanced threat which is installed the network and is operating effectively. I don't know the extent to which you're monitoring apparent failed error attempts to log into applications that people shouldn't be trying to log into. Those are not always errors. I don't know the extent to which you monitor the activity of individuals who've left the company and who might still be trying to use the data. I don't know the extent to which you monitor downloads of data, or the extent to which you've agreed with clients that you should prohibit downloads of data. So, how many of you know about the Morrison's case, out of interest? Okay, a couple of you. So for those of you who don't, Morrison's, as you know, is a supermarket. It's got about 100,000 employees, and they had a senior internal auditor. I did a presentation yesterday to the Internal Audit Institute, so it was fun talking about this. They had a senior internal auditor who, as part of the audit preparation, took all of the details, 100,000 people out of PeopleSoft, got someone in the IT department to give him access to that data, downloaded it onto his laptop, and from there onto a USB stick, so he could send the USB stick to the auditors. Because the auditors wanted all the data so they could check it and make sure that these people really existed and were paid normal kind of audit activity. Sounds cool? Yeah, sounds like a good thing to do. He kept a copy of the data on a USB stick. And when he left the company a little bit later, because he was feeling a bit hacked off with them, because he'd had a bit of a run-in with them over something that he hadn't really done, but they thought he had done, and yada, 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 he put the data all up on the internet. And he contacted the BBC and a few newspapers and said, Morrison's cybersecurity stinks. Absolutely hopeless. Look at all this personal data available on the internet. And some investigation quickly identified the fact that it wasn't Morrison's, it was him. He got arrested, he's been tried, he's in jail, that's terrific. And a number of staff said, actually, it's our data that's affected, and put together a class action suit. And there are going to be more and more class action suits. GDPR specifically allows for class action suits, which said that Morrison's is liable for what this person did. And the court case, it's interesting to read the judgment if you've got one of those sleepless nights and you need something that's going to really get you off. Read the judgment. It's a nice 40-page document. In it, the judge essentially says, been through every single thing Morrison's did, and broadly speaking, I think you did everything you should have done to protect the data. Good for you. However, it's also clear that this data was downloaded by somebody in the course of doing his job, and that falls within the definition of vicarious liability. Therefore, Morrison's, you are liable for the breach. And the judge went on to say, it seems weird to me to be saying that you're liable for a breach which has been carried out by somebody who's been found guilty of a crime in respect of that breach. So I'd like to encourage you to appeal my judgment, which they did. And the Supreme Court, after a reasonable period of time, said, yes, you're vicariously liable. We've had a good look at it, and we agree with the lower court's decision. You are vicariously liable because this person downloaded the data in the course of doing his job. He got it, he was able to access it in the course of doing his job. And that's one of the key parts of the definition of vicarious liability. Think about all of the processes that your clients might be operating which involve somebody being able to take data onto a USB stick or put it onto their laptop or onto some other device as part of their job. And the potential for them, therefore, to take a copy of that data and go, and that includes salespeople, that includes people saying, I need to download my entire customer file so that I can work out who I want to talk to next. All of those people doing those things in the course of their employment with you could, if they then go on to criminally expose the data, also expose your client or you to a vicarious liability finding. And vicarious liability really means liable. It means that if they take the case forward and say, we've each lost, I don't know, £1,500 as a result of this breach, we can demonstrate damages on an individual basis, Morrison's could be facing 100,000 members of staff times £1,500 worth of individual liability. Vicarious liability is going to be a really big issue. The judgment is going to be appealed again because that's the nature of these things, but it's kind of, it looks as though the only way that's going to get changed is if the law gets changed, and judges don't change laws, they simply interpret them. So in thinking about response, thinking about how you're going to deal with those kinds of issues, you need to be paying attention to what's changing in the business environment around you. You can't just say, here's the simple stuff we know how to deal with. You've got to recognize. So I think the only intelligent thing any organization can do is make it impossible for people to download large quantities of data. Under any circumstances, it can't be done. Say to the auditors, you will have to come and carry out your audit here. We're not downloading the data. We're not going to make it possible for data to go onto a spreadsheet and be uploaded to something else. It is going to have to be an automated link, because otherwise you have an exposure about which you can do nothing. So how do you respond? When an incident occurs, what do? Your incident response to this guy stealing the data was to get him arrested, get him dealt with. Very good response. Didn't help because your control in the first place was inadequate. The fact the judge thought it was adequate was irrelevant. The judge wasn't making a decision about your exposure. You have to make a decision. You have to say, am I happy to have the potential of a vicarious liability finding against me? If I am, what do I need to do to make sure that the possibility or the likelihood of the incident occurring is slim? What are the objectives when we're responding to an event? How are we going to assess it? How quickly do we have to pull it together? Who is going to deal with it? Who's the team that's going to respond to it? Do you have an emergency response team? Do you have with all of your clients a known point of escalation? So when they've got an incident, who do they come to? Do they come via your help desk? How does it get escalated? Who inside your organization helps your clients tackle cybersecurity? Those are the kinds of things which I would expect over the course of the next 5 years become a standard expectation of organizations as they think about dealing with security and compliance. Who do we escalate this to? Who's going to help us deal with the implications of what's happening? Because frankly, we don't understand it. Most organizations say, we don't understand what we need to do, but we understand something has to be done. And I would imagine those IT support providers who are able to deal with that are going to be the ones who have real competitive advantage over everybody else. So respond, and then finally, follow up. The GDPR provides for you to respond in bits. It's perfectly legal to put your first report in within 72 hours and say, here are some of the key things we already know, and to provide more data as it becomes available. But you need to do more than just provide more data as it becomes available. You need to really work out how the attacker got in. The simple incidents, the ones where your pre-tested scenarios really work, are worth double-checking that they were that simple. There wasn't something you missed. It's the more complex ones that take greater examination. If you look at any of the significant breaches which have been reported over the last few months, invariably the first released, this is what happened, turns out to be wrong. British Airways is quite a good example in point. They said, well, 385,000 customers' data sets were compromised through a breach of a frame on our website. Several weeks later, they came along and said, actually, it turns out to be rather more than that. And that's not unusual. The deeper investigation will often reveal that attackers got further than you at first thought they did. So the follow-up is important. Imagine if you didn't follow up, if you thought, yes, it's just 380,000, and it turned out a year later that there was 500,000. You may have just about contained the problem which came with reporting the first 380,000. You're going to struggle to contain the compliance problem that comes with not having done the rest of the investigation to identify the compromise of the rest. So investigate it, report it, check how well your incident response worked. One of the little known parts of GDPR's requirement around incident response is that you should document all of the stages of your response. And that's the law saying you need not just to respond, you need to be able to improve on how you responded. You're going to learn from it. And the essence of resilience is learning what you did right, what you did wrong, working out how to improve on it, working out which controls worked, working out what you can improve in your infrastructure, trying to reduce the likelihood of another event occurring. You need to update your reporting information, update all of the data that you're holding, and it's worthwhile, as you see more incidents occurring, carrying out some standard trend analysis. We as an organization treat almost anything that happens as an information security event. That's what it is, and we try and identify incidents fairly quickly. So we track very carefully incidents of things like phishing emails. We try and separate out the noise from the stuff which is targeted phishing emails. We try and work out who specifically is being targeted. It's clear to us that, it's pretty obvious, that we're still only having those folk who send out emails more often than others are the ones who are most prolifically targeted. So that says to us we don't have a major set of attacks coming at individuals inside the organization. It's much more in line with the way we see automated attacks primarily happening. But trend analysis should enable you to begin to get ahead of what's happening, and it can be part of the service which, with us, you supply to clients. I've talked about the idea of integrating cyber incident management with your help desk events and incident management. I think that's an important thing to be thinking about, because you do need robust and tested processes with responsibilities clearly identified and allocated if you're going to deal with incidents properly. An incident response officer, a team, a cybersecurity incident response team, depending on the size of your client network, there can be some value in creating a cybersecurity incident response team, because looking across all of your customers, you may be able to identify very specific trends, be able to identify common types of attack, be able to come up with common methods of defense, which enable more and more of your clients to be able to deal with the issues which they've got. Enabling you to detect, assess, and report on cybersecurity incidents, managing them, and continually improving them is all part of creating an effective incident management process. There's a standard, in case you're fascinated by the world of standards. ISO IEC 27035 is an ISO standard for cybersecurity incident management. You can get a copy of it on our website, and it basically talks about doing all of these very specific issues. So, got to integrate business continuity, disaster recovery, and incident response. That means you've got to be thinking about business risks, not just digital risks. You've got to bear in mind that business continuity deals with traditionally high impact but low likelihood events, so terrorist attacks, pandemics, traffic jams, power failures, extreme weather, fire, all of those things. Low likelihood, high impact events. You might think a distributed denial of service attack falls into exactly the same category. Most organizations are not prone to dealing with a DDoS attack. So if it occurs, it's going to be a very high impact on an organization if you've got 2 days or 3 days where your website or infrastructure is incapable of operating. Business continuity is about saying, how do we mitigate the impact of one of those types of events? There's not much you can do to mitigate the likelihood. Many of them are way beyond your control. What you're trying to do is mitigate impact. Insurance is part of it, but it's not the only part of it. And it's the dependence that business has on information and communication technology that you've got to integrate your business continuity system and your information security management system, the BCMS and the ISMS. And again, helpfully, regulation and law is driving organizations to think about this somewhat more seriously. So if you have clients in the critical national infrastructure or in the IT platform business, they're affected by the Network and Information Security Directive. The NIS came into force on the 9th of May, so just a couple of weeks ahead of GDPR, but it's a directive, so it depends on member state governments to create appropriate laws to bring it into force. And there is a transition period which really runs out round about now for organizations to be compliant with NIS. And NIS is basically saying that if you are a critical national infrastructure, and the definition of it is very specific, or you're an IT platform business, then you have to have an incident response process, you have to have a business continuity process, you have to have a cybersecurity management process, you have to have properly trained staff. So NIS is saying, actually these things go together. If you're an organization where, as a country, we rely on you, or a lot of organizations rely on you to provide a platform, all of these things go together, and by law now, you have to have operating systems that enable you to do those, and you have to be able to demonstrate that you do. So NIST is going down the route that we're proposing. You can think about these in terms of standards. So ISO 27031 is a standard in the ISO 27001 family around continuity of IT operations. 27035, as you've seen, is around incident response. 22301 is the International Business Continuity Management System specification. And there's a certification scheme for 22301. So just as you can get a certificate with 27001, so you can for 22301. And from an IT support company, broad approach, mostly you won't be thinking about talking to clients about 22301, but I'd encourage you, if that's the case, to start thinking differently, because integrating BCMS with an ISMS is part of how your clients should be increasingly addressing their challenges. Business continuity management systems are a fundamental component of effective resilience. They are, because they include going through steps like saying, which are our critical processes, which are our critical products, how long as an organization can we survive without a given process? How quickly do we have to have a process back up and running for us to be satisfied our customers will be okay? So the recovery time objective for a business process is, we know we have to have this back up and running within 2 hours. If you haven't done that kind of level of thinking, when something goes down, you're already panicking about how to get it up. You're trying to work out what a good recovery time looks like. Whereas having planned it, you already know. You know when the system goes down, we've got 2 hours to get it back up. Because we already knew we had 2 hours, we've done an awful lot of planning and testing our plans, so we know what steps we go through to get the systems back up and running. Mostly we already do that around core IT processes, but that's not necessarily the same as a business process. A business process is the process that ensures customers get what they want, or that money that's received in payments of debts gets credited to the bank account. All of those are business processes. And business continuity management encourages you to think about those processes in terms of effectiveness. Organizations with good business continuity management systems, of course, sooner or later find they've developed a reputation for safety, for dependability. I've never understood why banks don't have proper business continuity management systems. Have you? I mean, why, if you're a bank providing a bank account service where people might want to get money out when they get paid, or an ATM network where people might want to draw money out in order to spend it, why wouldn't you have a business continuity plan that ensures that you've thought through what might go wrong and how to restore it if it does? How can you possibly find yourself weeks later saying, still not working quite as well as we thought? How can you really roll out, as Barclays did so effectively when it changed how it provided stock broke services to clients? Say, it'll all go live, it'll all work, and some weeks later it still wasn't working, without any method of recovering for clients. All they could say to clients was, so sorry, we're sure it'll be better in a little while. So resilience should give organizations good marketing opportunities. And as I said, the combination of tying incident response, digital incident response, just as much as physical incident response, should all lead to one extent or another of invoking the business continuity plan. If you just think about business continuity, if you wanted to get into the secure part of an organization, why wouldn't you trigger a fire alarm? Most people, when they're dealing with fire alarms, are trying to get people out of the building. And a standard part of an effective fire alarm process is all of the electric doors get open, don't they? And they're held open because you want people stuck. So if you want to get into an organization, why wouldn't you trigger a fire alarm and just make sure you get left behind, or you go in the other direction, or you have a high-vis vest and you look like somebody who's trying to get people out? And most people thinking about fire alarms aren't thinking about stopping social engineer attacks. You need to integrate physical and digital. You need to think about the different ways in which attackers who are smart think of taking advantage of you. You also have to think, when you're thinking about resilience, about the supply chain. All organizations have suppliers. Most of our activity with suppliers now is done digitally. The best way, therefore, to get inside, to attack an organization is to take over one of their suppliers. Because if you've got staff trained to spot a phishing email, they're not going to spot a phishing email that comes actually from the email system of the supplier. Because it's genuine. It's completely, totally genuine. It just happens to have some attack malware in it. It says, and it's copied to a whole bunch of people that you recognize, you know them, coming from the email box of somebody you know, says, here's that report you wanted. Ding, you click on it, ding, down comes the malware, and you're finished. So if you're thinking about how you secure yourself, how you help a client secure themselves, you have to be thinking about how do we secure the supply chain? How do we make sure that the supply chain, the people we're depending on, are going to be secure themselves? And so the traditional supply chain model, and you can think about this from a cloud perspective as well, is that you, the customer, the business that has suppliers, you have tier 1 suppliers, they have their own tier 1 suppliers, they'd be your tier 2 suppliers, and downstream from that are tier 3 suppliers. You've got a customer. Customers, if you're a B2B business, they have end user customers. So in that traditional supply chain model, you want to make sure that your tier 1 suppliers are secure, but you want to make sure they're dealing effectively with their supply chain. You want to make sure that all the steps through that chain has people who themselves are secure. Because the weakest link in a tier 3 supplier may affect you directly. So part of cyber resilience includes looking at cyber relationships and includes looking at the cloud infrastructure. You might be operating or depending on a SaaS offering, but you need to make sure if you are that their platform and their infrastructure services are also secure. You can't just assume that the application that you're using in the cloud is secure because, hey, it's in the cloud. The cloud is no more secure than anywhere else. It's only secure because organizations make the step to do so. And as the ICO will tell you, it's you that is responsible for your personal data, not anybody else. You can't say, well, we thought it was in the cloud, so it should have been secure. You have to make sure. Negligence is you making sure. So the cloud supply chain is also about infrastructure, platform, and software as a service, just as much as it is about the suppliers who are producing products and services for you. And the last bit to be thinking about when dealing with cyber resilience is governance. And you'd expect me to talk about governance because that's what we as a company built ourselves around, the idea that governance should be applied to technology and particularly to cybersecurity. And so the board or senior management has a role in dealing with cybersecurity. The most common problem, I don't know whether you share this, with organizations who struggle to get information security initiatives off the ground is lack of board commitment, lack of budget, lack of leadership. You can have lots and lots of commitment to level down from the board, but if the board says, nah, got to go to lunch now, you're not going to make a lot of progress as an organization. Getting a board to recognize that a governance framework in which the board's role is to provide direction around cybersecurity, what level of risk are we prepared to take, what's our basis for deciding on initiatives on investment, the evaluation of proposals about how as an organization we do that, and then the monitoring of performance against those criteria and how we demonstrate conformance with a range of business regulations is the proper job of an organization's board. And even if the board is only one person in a small business, it's still his or her role, making sure that as an organization you are operating effectively. There are business objectives around communication, agility, cost reduction, resource optimization, competitive edge. That's part of what the board should be thinking about from a business point of view. From a risk environment point of view, it needs to be thinking about action at a distance. The fact that your attackers almost certainly are somewhere in China. We notice, I don't know whether you, to the extent to which you monitor what happens in the way of attacks, we see a very clear pattern in everything we monitor around our network where attack volume drops off from about 4:30 on a Friday afternoon, drops down very low through Saturday and Sunday, and then picks up through Monday morning. Might just be because it's part of people's job to attack us. That's pretty well how it looks around the world. Most attacks these days are not kiddies sitting in basements. They are organized crime, they're nation states, they are competitors, they're people operating to normal business hours with business objectives that they're pursuing in terms of how they're trying to deal with you as an organization. They're aiming not just to expose data. Most attacks are built around the idea that we'll get in there and then we'll find out what there is. They're not built usually around, we want to steal this specific data. They're built around, here is a vulnerability. Let's get inside, and once we're inside, we'll see what there is to steal. We'll escalate privileges. We'll go, gosh, here's a CIO who's got all of the application passwords in clear text in Notepad in his folder. Well, let's see what we can do with them. That's what happened to Sony. That's how Sony got so radically smashed up a couple of years ago, because the CIO, who should know better, didn't even encrypt or password protect even the set of passwords and usernames for all the applications that he had used to. So you get inside, you find out what you can use, you take advantage of it, you get the data out as fast as you can. Hey, who cares if it disrupts the network? That's not what you're there about. Might compromise commercial data. Could be a commercial attack. So boards should be thinking about that. And many of our smaller customers say to us, not us, who's going to attack us? And we say everybody. Because nobody in particular is going to attack you. Everybody in general is attacking you. Because they're not picking on individual organizations. They're picking on vulnerabilities. And they don't have to be smart to know what the vulnerabilities are. They just have to be able to go and look them up. There are a couple of standard formal sources that tell you what the most common vulnerabilities are. You can download the attack software, usually for free. You can get the more sophisticated stuff on the basis of sharing the profits with the folk who created it. This is a really, really good way to make a living. So that's a way to start contextualizing an idea of a cyber resilience model. Many of our clients are not doing anything, so they have to start somewhere. For us, the logical place for them to start is at compliance. Compliance brings with it not just breaches, but penalties. It brings loss of customers. It brings all sorts of complications that you don't want. So GDPR is one of the most obvious starting points for most organizations. Getting yourself GDPR compliant is a good step forward. It doesn't make you cyber secure, but it forces you around personal data to get secure. PCI DSS, if you're processing personal data, if you're processing payment card data, you should be compliant with the PCI DSS. If you've got a client processing payment card data, they should. It's a pain in the neck of a standard PCI DSS. It's a total disruptor of business. I hate the thing. It gets in the way of our e-commerce business, but you have to do it. If you have a PCI breach and you're not doing it, it just gets to be painful and expensive. And, of course, because a payment card number is personal data, a PCI breach is also a GDPR breach. So if you're processing payment card data, if you've got clients processing payment card data, they just need to be PCI secure. And PCI compliant doesn't mean somebody who doesn't know what they're doing going through a form and ticking the boxes and saying, yeah, I think that's probably all right. Because when you're breached, is when there's an investigation that demonstrates that, yeah, I think I'm all right, and you weren't, means that you weren't compliant. No good thinking you weren't compliant. So if you've got clients who are processing payment cards, unless they know what they're doing, unless you know what you're doing, you need to send in consultants who can help them actually get genuinely PCI compliant. And there might be a project involved because they have to reorganize their infrastructure around how they do that. They might have to change where they process data, how they collect data, and sometimes there are quite significant changes organizations have to make to get themselves compliant. You might have to be NIST, Network and Information Security Directive compliant. You might have customers that insist on you doing a statement on control, a SOC. You may be in the National Health Service and you have to do a DSP toolkit. Compliance is the starting point for cyber resilience. It's the thing that brings you a modicum, a level of cybersecurity, plus regulatory compliance and a reduction of reputation and financial damage if you have a breach. Once you've got yourself compliant, and one of the practical ways of getting started on cybersecurity is to move beyond simple compliance and implement cyber essentials. And many of you will already have done that. Many of you will have done that with your clients. Cyber essentials is, as you know, a government framework for ensuring that something like 80% of the known internet-borne attacks are dealt with. Cyber Essentials is something you should be making sure is renewed on an annual basis. We're shifting to an automated renewal process so that once you've signed the client up, we can very substantially simply re-invoice either them or you, whatever the arrangement is, and recertify them on an annual basis. The reality, if you look at, while Cyber Essentials doesn't ask you to recertify on a regular basis, it says the certificate is valid only on the day it's issued, and the reality is that threats change. If you're not updating on a 6-month to 12-month basis, you're having greater exposures. And certainly government contracts expect you to renew on at least an annual basis. So we're shifting to an automated model that can help you with the process of making sure that your clients automatically stay up to date, that unless their scope has changed, it's very easy for them to renew and for us to repeat the scans and repeat the compliance and maintain for them the ongoing business of being demonstrably at that basic core level secure. The step on from Cyber Essentials, which is basically only doing vulnerability scans on a limited part of the client's exposure, is regular penetration testing. And if you reflects on the fact that attacks which come in, look for and expose vulnerabilities in networks that a simple scan won't necessarily pick up, penetration testing becomes a logical thing to do. There's a reason why PCI requires both vulnerability scans and penetration testing. They give you different levels of protection. And again, your sensible clients will be thinking about doing penetration testing both internally and externally on a regular basis. We typically expect clients to be doing an internal penetration test once a year and to be doing an external penetration test between 2 and 4 times a year. And again, as we've seen clients want to move over to an ongoing basis, they don't have to worry about it year by year. We're creating annual contract offerings around each of those so that you can say to a client, here you can take an annual contract or a 3-year contract where this will happen on an automated basis, and we'll be able to get and share with you the penetration testing results. So that should make your sales processes somewhat easier and should mean that you're able to build longer-term relationships with clients without going through the hassle of renewal conversations. The individual offerings will still be there, but we're trying to make sure it's possible for you to help clients develop their core cybersecurity, their ongoing secure positioning. The core, the baseline cybersecurity position should be ISO 27001. You should have more and more of your clients getting ISO 27001 certified. It's the key requirement for most tier 1 suppliers, most government suppliers. Increasingly across the financial sector, we see organizations saying of their suppliers, you need ISO 27001. ISO 27001 is often made out to be the gold standard in cybersecurity. It isn't. Most organizations who are doing things properly will already be a substantial part of the road down towards ISO 27001 certification readiness. So you should be pushing more and more of your clients to get themselves, do a gap analysis for 27001, put in place and maintain a 27001 certification system. As your clients get 27001 embedded, you can begin thinking about developing a proper business continuity framework. And that's therefore about getting business continuity tied into their information security management system. It's about using standards like 27035, 27036, which we looked at earlier on, to build out their incident response capability, their business continuity management capability, and integrating that all into a single management system, which enables them to demonstrate to stakeholders the extent to which they are on top of the growing challenge of cyber resilience. The really resilient organizations begin extending that framework across the whole of their supply chain as well. Begin looking for their tier 1 and tier 2 suppliers to have Cyber Essentials and ISO 27001 certification. Begin looking at how, as an organization, you have a proper governance framework which ensures that you have a long-term commitment to the development and management of cybersecurity across the whole ecosystem within which you operate. So that's a kind of model that is also a journey. And you can think of, over a period of 3 to 5 years for most of your clients, how you can move them from a basic compliance position all the way through to one of embedded governance, a thoroughly cyber resilient organization. And from both a customer service point of view, but also from a commercial point of view, it should be an evolving relationship which can be financially valuable to you as well as financially beneficial to your clients in terms of managing their risk and their exposures.